Another strategy you can use to kind of test to see if something is a false breakout, is breaking through a trend line, is to apply a filter. And we can use filters in lots of different types of indicators, but we're going to talk about applying a filter in a trend line and specifically, applying something when trend lines are broken, for instance, in terms of, trading mechanisms. So let's talk about that. So at its base level, a filter is simply a modification of any trading indicator. And basically, you're setting a predetermined rule on an action that you'll take when certain conditions are met. All right. So that's just the key thing. It is predetermined. You've already decided that when this happens, then you will then you will take a certain amount of action. And we're talking about this specifically with trend lines, but you can use filters with different types of indicators as well. And some work better than others when we get into the lessons around, more detail around filters with other types of indicators. But in this case, we're looking for a trend line breakage, right? We're doing a filter, a predetermined rule that when a trend line is broken, we can modify the clear rule of whether to buy or sell by adjusting it with a filter. And that filter can be an amount or a percentage of the break. So it needs to break by a certain percentage before we'll take action, not simply breaking, but has to do so by a significant or certain amount of percentage breakage, or duration or time of the break. How many, let's say, time periods, maybe a day or days after before I take action. So I'm not taking action immediately. I might be taking action because I've modified my indicator to, let it kind of be out there a little bit more in terms of time. And the key part, again, of all this with filter conditions is they need to be met in order to take action. You predetermine this and you said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to follow this plan is the idea. So let's look at an example that will really kind of bring this home. So let's say we know the support line exit rule, right? So you're selling, you've bought into an upward trend and you're going to sell out of that trend as soon as possible after the low falls below the support line. The low, anytime in that low price range during the day, the support line is broken, the trend is broken, you're selling. That's the rule, right? So that's the rule. Now let's modify or filter this rule is another way you can approach it. So you're not selling exactly at that point. You're trying to, give yourself a little bit more to see if it might be a false or temporary breakout. So ways you could do that is say, okay, I know the support line exit rule says I should sell as soon as it breaks the line, breaks that support line. But I'm going to have an amount type rule, and it might be like something like, once the price range, I'm going to say the price range has to break the support line by 10%, then I will sell. So it's not simply enough that it breaks it, it's got to do it significantly enough by 10%. Or I might say not only the range, I might say, well, the actual final close has to break the support line. And that has to not only break the support line, but that needs to do it by, let's say, 5%. Then I will sell. By the way, these numbers, 10%, 5%, those are not etched in stone. You can use your own numbers, and you'll want to, as you learn your securities or maybe the universal securities you're trading, you might make those numbers lower or higher, depending on your risk level and how much profit you want to book. But also, like some securities have wider ranges of of trading, and so 5% or 10% might be too low. Maybe you want to make that even steeper, or vice versa. You may make that 2% and 4% or whatever. You can pick one or both, either way. But the idea is you're picking an amount that the price range has to support by in order for you to take action. In this case, we're looking at breaking a support line to sell. So in this case, we would sell. You could also use a duration type of rule too as a filter. And for example, you'd say, I will allow one full break of the support line, but not two. So that means if it breaks the support line, on one day, let's say we're trading on a day, and you're like, okay, it broke the support line exit rules, I'm supposed to sell as soon as possible. So I should be selling now, but I'm going to set up a filter and a rule and say, I'm going to wait until it breaks it twice. And if it doesn't break it twice, right there in the following day, then I'm sticking in there. So that's the idea of making these a little bit more filtered out. And again, these are examples, adjust to your own securities and as you gain experience and what you feel comfortable with too. But the idea is I'm not following the hard and fast rule of the line was broke, I sell. I'm putting some filters or modifiers to it to allow me to stay in a little bit longer, put a little bit more at risk, because I'm taking a little more risk around that rule, but I'm also trying to filter out a false breakout is what I'm trying to do here. So if we look at this example here, the same example, we could see that, okay, we bought in on the second touch. We're in a nice uptrend here. You could see that when it breaks the line there right at A there, we should have been selling right away if we followed the rule to the letter. It broke the line, we should have sold. But let's say we had a filter that said we have to not only break it, but it's got to break it by 10%. We would say at the letter A, estimate here in this example, but we'd say, okay, we're not going to sell here because it didn't break the line by more than 10%, right? So it didn't break the line by more than 10%. We're not selling because it's less than 10%, really is a way to look at it. So it's no sell, the break is less than 10%, it's no sell on A. Now, if we look to B, now that it's broken past the line a second day or stayed below that line, we can say, oh, we're going to sell because the close of that day is greater than 5% breakage through that line. Not only broken through the line, but the actual closing of the day, that was our second example. Now we're selling because it broke through. And then if we were applying C, we would say, okay, we're not going to sell on the first full day because that's B. So let's say we're looking for a first full day of a full sell through, and that was our rule, our modifier, and we wouldn't sell on B, never would, because it's only the first day, but we will sell on the second full day that's below the support line. So this was, again, our rule was the first full day. You can see A was not a full day as far as being below the close being below the support line, right close to it, you could say, maybe right on it. But the first full day we could say is B, not selling because that's our rule, our modified filter, and then the second day we're going to sell on the second full day, and so that's when we're selling on C. The unfiltered rule, without that would say, okay, you're selling as soon as you're breaking that line. And you can see, okay, well, we've got these things in place, and then we have this little turnaround, and maybe it'll start a new uptrend, right? But maybe we held in there a little bit longer than if we would have sold right at the line. Again, who knows what else is going to happen after we break through the trend line. If anything, we know what's supposed to have happened is the trend is broken, but there are temporary pullbacks, there are false signals, and so this would be a way to kind of filter out a false signal if this was going to go back upward is the idea. But that's how when you make your predetermined rule, then you follow your rule. You got to have discipline around that. So if you're using a filter strategy, there are definitely some arguments against using filters for trend lines. There are good arguments for using filters for maybe other indicators, but for trend lines, there's some good arguments against them, and you should be aware of those. And one of them is that the breakout principle is a very powerful and well-known concept. If you just follow it and you don't play with filters, you're going to be fine. And that's very true. In fact, that would be, I would say, the #1 argument is stick with that powerful, well-known concept, and it's simpler that way, and you can execute that way, and you can have success that way. Also, when you'll know other traders are following that powerful and well-known concept, so they're getting out too as well. Again, trying to, let's say in the case of a sell rule, they're getting out because the trend line's broken, so it's putting more downward pressure because they're following the core rule around that, and they're not using a filter. So that's one way, that's a very strong argument. Another argument would be that each security should, in theory, have its own filters applied to it, as one size does not fit all, right? Each security is its own kind of entity. Thus, you'd have to juggle many different amount and duration filters to trend lines to really make it work or be fair application of it. And that's hard to apply and track, right? If you're tracking whatever, pick a number, 10 different securities, just to pick a number, and each one has its own filter, and some are, duration filters, and some are time filter, or percentage filters, or time filters, whatever it might be. That's a lot to juggle around that. It makes it hard to stick to your disciplined, predetermined rule. So that's a good argument too as well. Though I think with a lot of securities, there's more commonality than that, but there is a good point that each one certainly is its own entity, and you have to be wary of that. But as you apply and you learn your filters, you can kind of overcome that argument a little bit. But that first one, that the breakout principle is powerful, that's a very strong argument. So here's a strategy you can use. You don't have to use it as far as a filter strategy. And again, you can always fall back to the core rules around that. They're core rules for a reason, so think of it that way. But if you like the idea of trying to use filters or other ways to modify to kind of not, if you've been getting frustrated with maybe getting out too soon when it's actually more of a stronger trend, and maybe using other indicators to help you, you can use these filters and these other types of strategies to try to manage your way through the most vexing problem in technical analysis, which is false breakouts, for sure.